give Logan your full undivided attention and
What
learn
undivided?
how to make armor. Yay!
One-sided race enough on the board that I need.
Armor.
Okay, so obviously you all are here to learn about making armor for cosplay in relatively cheap ways, because armor is probably the most expensive thing to make besides really large props.
Or fursuits.
Or fursuits. But those things are like a whole outfit, so I don't know how you want to classify that. Basically, I'm going to start with, there's multiple different materials, and the common one that most people use, if you came to the last workshop that we did that was propalated, Jace did his craft foam working with armor, which is pretty much what this is, except for a little bit smaller thickness-wise. And usually it comes in like 8x11 sheets, and you know it's just regular old foam. You create whatever shape you want. In basic building. The foam that is better for like chest plates or bigger armor pieces is what you would have here. Which thanks to Bernard for actually bringing in something that I needed. This is what EVA foam looks like, and it's pretty much exactly the same as craft foam in feel, look, and like just general behavior, except for the fact that it is just usually like twice, 3 times, maybe sometimes even 4 times as thick. As a little disclaimer, I bought all this foam and it came this Monday. And upon opening the package, I realized that I made a mistake in the checkout process. That this foam is actually a third of the thickness that it's supposed to be. So I don't exactly have any, EVA foam for really to work with, because that basically is just the thickness of craft foam. But it works in pretty much the exact same way as EVA foam. It's just thicker. So I'll pretty much be modeling small scale prop stuff with the craft foam that I have, and then for the topics that are more EVA related, I will be modeling with this just basic foam core, because foam core is actually very similar in the sense of EVA foam and thickness wise, and the only difference between it is if you take foam core and you bend it, it doesn't bend back, because it's more like paper than it is like foam. So those are the main materials that you get for armor. If you go up in pricing, you can start making things out of plastic. They have very similar, they're almost like Kevlar sheets. They're just little plastic sheets. Most of it's known as Sintra. You can either use the same techniques as you would with craft foam and just cut out your pieces and heat mold them, and you get plastic armor instead of foam armor. But it's a lot more expensive. And sometimes it's a lot harder to buy because it's a lot heavier and only certain places keep it in stock. Although I just found out this past weekend that Madison Craftsman on State Street sells really big sheets of Sintra, and I did not know about it. It's in like the really far back corner, and I totally plan on using it. And you can also use it for vacuum forming if you have a vacuum form, but it's hard and really expensive.
I have a question. I don't know where Artisan Craftsman is.
Artisan Craftsman is this
But I really do.
very, I wouldn't call it small, but it's very inconspicuous craft and art shop that is on Gorham, where from here, if you go straight towards State and walk down State, I think it's like 2 blocks, and take a left, the only indication of where it is this little round sign up above the street that says Artisan Craftsman, because it's an entirely underground shop. So you walk through the door, go down the stairs, and it's the full bottom basement area.
What's it next to?
It's next to Paul Palmatics and Bombers.
AJ Bombers.
Oh, okay.
It's like 2 blocks from MATC downtown.
Yeah.
Really close to my house, for reference, those of you who know where my house is.
Anyway, continuing on, the nice thing why EVA foam is one of the best things for making armor is One, it's cheap, relatively. This giant sheet cost me like $15. So you can get a lot of it relatively cheap. I bought this. You can technically buy EVA foam like this. I guarantee Bernard bought this. It's probably Walmart.
No,
No.
Amazon Day.
You bought it at Amazon?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like
You buy these and they're their label is exercise mats. As you
The
can
yoga
tell
mats and
by
stuff.
the back, it has
Uh-huh.
that kind of like
The
ribbing
checks.
effect, the checking.
Yeah.
But I recently came across a site it's foam by mail. It's exactly how it sounds.
Damn, I didn't bring my gauntlets. I made my gauntlets out of EVA foam. I could have gotten
That stuff?
one of them. Yeah. It's a little bit thicker than that, I
Yeah.
think. Mine.
Foambymail.com. You go there. I can put up a better link because they have a lot of foam products beyond just EVA foam. But it's under the category of closed cell foam because this would be considered open cell where you can actually, if you look in the foam, you can actually see the cells of the foam, which is basically the air pockets. Whereas with this kind of craft foam, you really can't. Especially in the thicker EVA foam that you get down here. And the other thing that makes it the best is it's heat formable, in which case you take a heat gun to it and you heat it up and it kind of gets a kind of like silvery shimmer to it while it's still warm, and you can basically form it to whatever you want. You wait for it to cool, and then when you take it off, it stays in that shape. And even if you bend it out of shape, it will form back to that shape. And that's why a lot of people use it.
What's a heat gun?
A heat gun. It's basically an industrial hairdryer. For lack of a better term, except for you don't want to use it because it will catch your hair on fire. Most heat guns
burn your
have two
skin too.
settings, low and high. Low, it pretty much does it on low setting for if you don't want it to be like super warm, or if you're doing a really small project, you don't want to burn your fingers because you have to like hold on to it because it will burn your fingers even at this distance. And then the high setting is what you would probably use for like if you have like a big sheet that you need to heat up really quickly and so that you can mold it. The warning on the high, and it even has the warning here, it's really hot. Like I've given myself 30-degree burns on it. Just be careful when using them because they really do a lot of damage. And when you're using one, don't stay in one spot for more than like a second because especially with foam, it will start to bubble and burn and start to just do
Disintegrate.
weird things that you don't want it to do. And one, it destroys your foam, and two, it doesn't look good. So
Three, it's a fire hazard.
fire. I guess moving on to the actual armor part. Since I was kind of short notice for making this, I made an armor pattern that I'm going to be doing for Asen. I'm doing Jean's armor from Ruby. And so this is his little like front chest plate thing that I did over this weekend. I'm not going to go into depth with pattern making for armor because don't do what I do. I did this really bad. Just do what I say, don't do as I do. I wrapped myself in saran wrap and put tape over it and then drew it on my body of what I wanted it to be and then cut it out. It works. It's not the best way, and a lot of times you get really, really funky patterns with it, but if you can't figure it out, it works. So,
I would say get somebody else to help you with the pattern.
yeah, if you have somebody else to help you with it, it goes
Great.
a lot better and a lot smoother, but sometimes it's better if you actually know how to make a pattern, which I don't. So basically, take your pattern, and then you get your foam, and then obviously you can put your pattern on your foam.
Or put it at the front of it facing down towards the phone.
It should be
Something.
symmetrical. For
It should
this
be.
one, if you have your pattern
Right.
and you have it like this, you're gonna want to put it face down. It doesn't matter for mine because they're symmetrical, or it should be symmetrical. It probably isn't. Then you get a box cutter, X-Acto knife, heavy duty utility knife. Make sure it's really sharp, and I will demonstrate later what happens if you use a not sharp one. it's just a bad choice when cutting foam because it'll catch on the foam. It won't cut very well. It'll take twice as long to cut out something that will be really quick, especially if you're doing a straight line. Whereas with this new edge that I put on, I can cut a straight line in 2 seconds, whereas this one, it took me like 2 minutes to cut a straight line down the length, like 4 feet. So sharp blades are nice, but of course, beware, you will cut yourself. As you can see, I cut myself a lot, and you will cut yourself. Be aware of that. Band-aids are a necessity. So take your pattern, take a pen. I recommend Sharpie. It works better. It's a lot easier to see, but obviously I forgot to bring a Sharpie. So
I have a felt pen.
Ooh.
That might be better than.
I mean, it's still working. That's also why foam by mail. There's 2 different colors you can buy this foam in. You can either buy it in black and white.
Ooh.
I bought it in white. One, because Jean's armor is white, so less work for me to do, even though I'm going to be covering it with other things later, but unimportant. It makes it easier to mark on. But if you say, for instance, have Bernard's here, where it's black anyway, and you don't really feel like covering it or doing expending other materials to put plasti dip on it, it's already black in the color that you want it. So it makes it easier. So you draw your pattern onto your sheet. Then
It's Jen.
No, Jenna went home.
Oh, okay.
She has an exam tomorrow. That sucks.
That does suck.
Yeah, she's being more responsible than all of us.
okay, so you have your pattern going. So next thing is when you're making cuts with, it doesn't matter so much with craft foam because it's really thin, but when you're using it on EVA foam, you're gonna make you want to make very precise cuts and cut as long as you can but as soon as you start to feel it start ripping, instead of make sure it still feels like it's cutting like butter, because if you don't, it's gonna start ripping your foam instead of actually cutting your foam, and then your edges are gonna look weird. You're gonna have to do extra work on finishing them, and it just takes a lot more time, and it's not worth your effort. So you basically just take your knife and you cut along your lines that you have. Personally, I like to do a cut that's mostly through, then go back over and cut through later, just to make sure that I'm not actually ripping the foam. Because if you try, especially with thick EVA foam, if you try to cut through the entire foam all in one shot, you're going to be ripping the foam. It's not going to look good. It's just better safe than sorry.
Question?
So you're scoring it before you.
Basically.
Yeah.
But you're not truly scoring it in the sense of making little incisions. You're pretty much just slowly going through it layer by layer, just making sure that your cuts are clean.
Wish I knew that
And then
before I start working on 5. Thank you.
so I will probably deal with that later, and you cut it out. It's pretty simple, but in the sense that you have this piece for the character is completely flat, so you don't have to do a lot of edging. But say for instance you have armor that has built out and has chest plates that has multiple pieces that lay on top of each other. When you're working with it, you're going to want to have corners that meet up, and you don't want them to be offset. So say for instance you have these 2 pieces of foam, and you want them to meet at a 45-degree angle. You put them at a 45-degree angle, you get that nice little V at the top, because they don't match up entirely because they're 90-degree corners. So you basically have to take your corners and cut off the corners down the edge of the foam. Now, it's going to be a little hard to represent that, so I'm going to put it on the board, and I'm going to use a technique that I do, especially if you have really at 45-degree angles. I can pretty much eyeball it, but I'm good at geometry. If you can't eyeball your angles that you need to cut at, I recommend getting a piece of paper and doing this. So say for instance you want your 45-degree angle. You take your first piece. So you draw the angle that you wanted it to go off So this is your first piece, this is your second piece. Then you measure out how far, I'm going to go for X, this is math class now. And you're going to basically measure like how far distance-wise like your material is. So for instance with craft foam, it's not very thick, so you really don't have to like do a whole lot with like cutting of the edge-wise because it's really thin. Compared to say the 1-inch EVA foam, which you have 1 inch, so you're going to have to cut off more and get more of an edge on so that the edges match up and make them be more solid, and you won't see as many gaps. So you're going to have this, so you're going to draw your material thickness, and then you're going to pretty much, yeah, I can't draw straight. So you're going to draw here, and then basically you're going to go up here and you're going to connect the corners. So that line basically represents where you have to cut. So if this was your first piece, you now have to cut, and like that's the end, you now have to cut that entire piece off. So you would then take the piece that you have cut, line it up where it is, and basically mark on this side however far down over here that you have to cut, draw a line across, and then take the knife and pretty much cut straight down that line, connecting the like blade edge down this corner from where the line that you drew and the edge up here to get your like the like angled edge that you need to cut. I'm going to do a little small one just because it's a basic 45 degrees. So you're going to basically start like this. If you saw Jenna's spear, I had to do this with foam core as well, so it works with a lot of things, especially with thicker materials. If you're doing it with paper, obviously you won't do it because paper is really thin, but you just slowly work your way down with foam. And you get this nice little edge on that foam. And then you would do it with your next piece. And then this bulb doesn't want to cut today. So, you now have your two edges. Then when you line them up, then you now, relatively, if you had done this right, because I was trying to make this quick, your edges now line up and there's barely any gaps. Now, when you're doing this and you have, gaps like this, there's obviously gonna be some very fine, minute, like gaps, unless you are, cutting it with a laser and you are like super accurate with your cuts. And that takes practice, frankly. Like, the more you cut foam and the more you do these angles, the more you realize how they work, the better your cutting hand works. To make it so that you can like glue these together and not get like, obviously you want to glue them together, but you don't want glue to be seeping out through the holes, but you still want the holes to be covered. You would basically take this and a general masking tape, and so you take your masking tape and you would attach it halfway on the outer edge to say this piece, and then connect it on this piece along the edge that you wanted to be on the outside. And then you would glue in here, like glue in that little like ridged area, and then glue them together. And then after it dries, you should be able to take off that nice little bit of tape, and it will be perfectly glued together, and there will be no glue on the other side, on the outside that you are dealing with. Because most armor that we deal with, obviously we're not doing solid armor, at least most of us aren't, especially if you're doing like 3D, like say for instance you're doing like Spartan armor from like Halo 3. That armor is, comes out to like here. You don't want to make that whole thing out of foam. So you're doing just the outer parts. So you'll be doing a lot of this where it's hollow on the inside, and you can do this technique. If you're not doing this technique, you're just going to have to be really careful with your foam, especially because most EVA foam, like because it's foam, you can't really use a whole lot of glues with it because it will melt the foam. I have a little handy dandy, I had it with my prop workshop, the glue chart that basically says what material you're gluing, what materials you're gluing to what material you're gluing, and it says what kind of glues you can use for what materials. Just to not screw them up.
There's a site for that, thistothat.com.
Oh yeah.
I have the little handy dandy chart just so I can always have it on my phone. So whenever it's like, oh, I'm gluing these two things together, quick reference. Okay, good. If you're planning out an entire project, use sites. You research your stuff so that you don't, make mistakes halfway through. Because unnecessary mistakes take a lot of time. Usually, you waste a lot of money, and it's not conducive, especially when you don't already have a lot of money.
Kind of unrelated, but kind of related. What if you're working on a project that people have cosplayed before, but you're using materials that are different from what they've done?
Well, on that one, I guess it really depends. If you're using a different material but doing it in the same way, like for instance, I made 3D maneuver gear last year for the cosplay club. But I was following Junker's tutorial out in California for making the 3D maneuver gear. He used a different material than I did because he used a Sintra plastic and I used a PVC plastic.
Mm-hmm.
And since they were the same thickness and about the same type of material, I could pretty much use the same tutorial to do the same things, like the same cutting things. But if you're compared to, say, using Sintra plastic compared to EVA foam, obviously your glues are going to be different, your weight's going to be different, your attachments are going to be different because Sintra is a lot heavier compared to EVA foam, whereas you can probably get away with using plastic straps for EVA foam, whereas potentially with Sintra you might have to glue it onto something more stable to get it onto you. It all depends. If you foam versus Sintra, it's not going to be much of a difference. It's just a lighter material. Glue is the major difference. The tools that you're working with are usually the major difference. Really, it all depends on the approach and how close of an approach you're doing with them. I guess that's all I have to say on that. A lot of it's just a case-by-case basis. A lot of prop work in that same sense is trial and error. Unless you're just really good at using the material that you can pretty much think your way through an entire prop from scratch. But research is also another thing. You can always look up what other people have done and see if you can find something that's kind of close. Other than that, just trial and error until you get it right. It may take a lot of money because obviously trial and error, there's the error part of it. You have to, unless you get it right on the first try, which good for you.
Done.
Even as a guy that's been making props for 3 years, I still get it wrong on the first try. So if you get lucky, good for you. You don't have to worry about wasting more money, but you gotta prepare for the fact that we will make errors.
Given that you prepare to making errors, would you suggest that maybe buying a few extra materials so you can make a miniature version of your prop to make sure that everything's gonna attach properly?
Especially say for instance you felt like making armor about foam core. Now foam core, you can technically make armor out of foam core because it works in the same way as EVA foam, but it depends on what you're making it out of because obviously it doesn't bend, but it's doable. You wouldn't want to make it, foam core is cheap enough that you could probably do it, but if you wanted to do a mock-up, you can take cardboard because it behaves relatively similar enough so that you can figure out how things are going to fit together before you fit them together and spending a whole lot of money. For instance, I now wasted, I wouldn't say wasted, I now bought $40 worth of foam, including shipping, that I pretty much am not using entirely because it's the wrong size. So I now have to spend more money buying more foam, which isn't going to be a problem because I'm going to be using this at some point, but if you're using a very specific material that you are only using for this project and you will probably never use it again, buy extra, but make sure you know it's the right product, because you don't want to spend like hundreds of dollars going into it and then realize, oh, this isn't actually what I wanted. Well, now I have $100 worth of materials that's just going to be sitting around rotting.
So do you like keep stashes of stuff that you use often?
I have 4 like Rubbermaid containers of prop materials, prop paints, and prop tools. And I only use really about 2 containers, but there's that other 2 containers where you just maybe might need something in there. You don't know. If it's like pieces like this, I probably am not going to use, because foam core you can buy in like giant sheets, like 4 foot by 4 foot sheets at the bookstore for like $5. So it's not, that's an expense that I'm willing to like not go out of my way to get. Whereas if I was buying like, you know, EVA foam, where getting it in or shipping it, it's expensive and takes a lot of time, then saving even small pieces like this could do well for detailing on armor. And you never know when you just need, you know, just that amount for whatever you're dealing with. Now, mind you, I'm not advocating hoarding either. We all know as cosplayers, a lot of us are like, oh, I might use this in the future, just maybe, especially with like fabric scraps.
Oh. Yeah.
Not pointing any fingers, but they all know who they are. So in that sense, there will be times where you will have to make a decision in what you really want to keep and what you don't. So if you have scraps like this, you're like, oh, I might use it, and then, you know, a few months down the road, you haven't used it, and it's be like, you know, it's time to throw it out, because you might just replenish it. Unless you are really planning like, oh, I know exactly what I'm going to be using this for, then you can put it away and be like, okay, once you finally start on that project, you now have it. I think that pretty much covers that. Where was I? I think this segued off of glue and gluing everything together.
Whoops.
Usually with armor, your best friend is hot glue, because 1, it's super, super cheap and you can find it everywhere. 2, it's really quick to apply and really quick to dry. The only minus of it is really, really messy if you don't know how to use it. Hence the tape trick, because you get those weird strings and it likes to leak through things. And hot glue, when on the outside of props and like costumes and armor, it does not look good. It really doesn't, because it goops up. It doesn't take paint very well. It's very hard to get rid of, and unless there is one occasion where getting it on the outside looks good, and if you're making like, I say period, but it's not really, but period looking accurate, say like metal armor, where you'd say would have like welding on the armor. Glue makes a very good, like, or hot glue makes a good alternative to make things look like they're welded, because it goops up in the same way that welding material would look on a piece. So you would basically just goop it up along the line that you would say would be welded, especially where, like, say for instance these pieces were supposed to be welded. You'd glue them together to start with to make sure it works. Then along that line, you would then just do a little bit of glue and like dabs and like make sure that it looks varied. Obviously you don't want just a straight line of glue. And that's just trial and error and just artistic leeway. Just to make it look like it's welded. And then you'll probably have to put primer and stuff on glue, especially a few coats of it, because hot glue really just does not like paint. So you're going to have to be really careful on that, but then once you put paint over it, especially like metallic paint, it'll look like weld, like really well, especially because it has like divots in it. It just looks imperfect, which is what welding does. So that's really the only excuse I like hot glue like on the outside for. Otherwise, it's better just to keep it on the inside and make everything look clean. The other thing is, I want to show the demonstration of what a good knife does and what a bad knife does. So I'm going to hand around this piece, and obviously don't look at the edge that I just cut, because that edge looks really bad. But if you look at all the other edges, they are really like you can see the foam, and it's really clean. Like there's no like pieces that are like sticking out or pieces that are missing, and it's just a straight feel to it. In general, it looks nice on the outside. Now, this is my bad knife. It's really dull. Like I've been using this knife for like a few months, and I had to go buy a new one because it was just that bad. Whereas if I start cutting on this, like you're gonna get, one, it takes longer because it doesn't like go through the foam all that well, and you just, one, your lines won't be straight because it doesn't cut very well. But as you go through it, you're gonna notice that it's kind of grabbing the foam as you go, and you get this really crappy like edge pulling, and the foam on the inside starts to get pulled by the blade, and it's very obvious when you look between the two what the difference is, and you can rotate it on the same one just to look at the difference between the two. And it's not a terrible thing because it is fixable, but it's a lot nicer.
Maybe it's called the Edge of Glory.
Okay.
Okay.
That's an inside joke, and I'll let you guys look that up on
That's what I
YouTube.
thought about. You said bad
But
knife and good knife. You guys
there are
I was
ways to
thinking
sharpen
that.
knives. There's actually a lot of DIY ways to sharpen knives that are a lot cheaper. For
Ceramic
instance,
cups.
if you have a coffee mug, on the
Ceramic.
bottom they
Mhm.
have a little like plaster part that is not usually like covered. If you take your knife and just kind of like gently, because you don't want to break it, just kind of like rub it against the edge going one way, and then flip the other side. Usually you can get a few more cuts out of it, like consistently, because it starts to like shave down the knife and make it sharper again. Now, mind you, it's not the best way to like, one, to sharpen your knife, because it only works so long. Like I had to sharpen this 4 times until I was able to get a new knife because it was just not worth it.
Is that a normal utility knife?
Yeah, this is a heavy duty utility knife.
If you unscrew that middle
Yes,
screw-
there are other blades in here.
Yeah, you just-
So, I've already used those.
You got like a pack of it.
Yeah, you can buy more. Like, I personally like to buy more of them just because I like having knives. And it's always one of those things where it's like, if you lose this, well, at least even though I don't have another, I don't want to, I now still have another knife, even if it's bad. Or if you buy like, because now I have like 3 of these, in case I lose one, I have a backup. Then you can buy like replacement packs. Usually on the package, it tells you what the replacement like heads are, like the number where you can buy them. Most stores where you buy these sell the replacement blades, so it's not hard to find. They're really easy to replace too, but just keep your knives sharp. It's just better, but once again, because of the fact that it's sharp, be careful. You will cut yourself, because I have a cut here, I have a cut here. This actually happened today as I was cleaning all my stuff up. And you don't want blood on your props. It's
Or on your
not nice.
Cheshire Cat fur.
Hey, I did not get blood on it.
If you're kneeling, don't cut a mid-artery. Like keep all the stuff over here when you're cutting.
Blood is only good in the final step if you want it. You don't want it on the other parts.
Cut away from yourself.
Yes. Cut away from yourself is a good idea. If you can, there are some things that you just can't. Like if you're cutting a straight line down, like a 4-foot straight line, it's really hard to cut like this. It just is hard. So obviously you have to do this and then step out of the way. Or especially like if you're cutting really small details, it's really hard to cut like this, to cut away from yourself. So just be careful and be aware that you probably will cut yourself and be prepared for that fact.
Always have some
supplies.
medical supplies, yes, but always have a nice surface for you to cut on too.
Always wear life alert.
I think that pretty much covers it, at least for armor. There's a lot of like specific pieces of armor that are a little harder, like for instance helmets. Helmets are at least for me, some people find them really easy. I find them the most difficult prop to make and just conceive of because there's a lot of geometry that goes into making a helmet. There's a lot of mock-up and trial work that goes into making helmets. And in a general sense, they're just really hard because there's so many curves on, because it's a head instead of, a flat plate usually. And if you're going to be making a helmet, one, definitely do your research on what you're making, because if you can find somebody else that's already made it, especially in the material that you're doing, follow them, unless they obviously did a really crappy job, and just don't follow them. Because it's a lot easier to do it from somebody else's tutorials than making it from scratch. And I say that in a general sense. Like, if you can find a tutorial for how to make something, don't make it from scratch if you don't have to. It just makes your life easier. There is also one thing that I want to tell you. It's kind of a detailing thing. I don't think I can technically do it on this because I don't think it's thick enough. But on EVA foam, you'll see that on a lot of armor, there's kind of like, you'll see like divot lines that are kind of like edging. I don't know a specific like example. I think the closest example I know is if any of you play Mass Effect, Shepard's armor has a lot of like detail lines on it. And you can, that are in the foam, but they aren't technically another layer of foam. You can make those kind of lines by taking your knife and gently and making sure that you are not going through the foam. You make a small incision line just in like the first few like layers of foam down the line of where you want it, and then you would take your heat gun and go over the line where you were. And because of how foam works, when you heat up the foam, it contracts. So along that line, the edges of the foam will retract and kind of open up, and it creates nice even lines, because as long as you cut straight, instead of trying to like take an engraving tool and cut a line, which will only be as straight as your hand movements, if you cut a line with a knife, the edges of the foam are cut exactly parallel with how you cut with the knife. So when you do it like that, the lines will always be perfectly parallel. Even if the line is technically wobbly, the wobbly lines will still be parallel with each other. Like, they won't be like wobbly and like, it will be evenly spaced along that entire line. You won't get parts that are thinner than others. It definitely looks a lot cooler and detailing wise instead of like layering foam, because it's sometimes layering foam is good if you're doing like a lot of things have like trim on them, which is what this piece is going to be, because I'm going to repurpose this for the armor trim instead of making it for the actual armor. So you can just do that, because trim usually is always an evenly spaced trim around the edge, and it's usually raised, but it's not like depressed usually. If it's thicker than just a basic line, like cut line for the detailing lines, you're gonna have to do an engraving, or you're gonna have to do layering, because the cut line only expands as much as your knife cuts. And to get it to expand more, you have to cut deeper. And obviously if your foam is only so thick, you can only cut through it so far. I only recommend cutting through about halfway through as thick as your foam, which I know is really hard to like judge as you're cutting, because like, especially with this, it's really hard to tell that you're only like 1/8 of the way through the foam, because this is 1/4 of an inch thick. So it's better just to do surface cuts, especially for detail lines, just to make sure that you don't cut through your foam. Because if you cut through your foam, I'm not saying it's ruined, but it's a lot harder to fix compared to if you had cut only so far and then you realize, oh, I needed to be a little bit deeper, and you cut a little bit more. Less is more in this case.
There's also other types of utility knives that you can lock the blade at just an arbitrary location, so you can get like a certain depth, and then use that certain depth as your like maximum depth for
Yep.
cutting it.
There's always different tools if you can find them. and they're useful for whatever you're doing, use them. Provided they're obviously, not super expensive.
Or you can just layer like foam or cardboard or something along the edge of the utility razor or such like that.
Yeah, so you can even, take your knife and measure how far, you want to cut on your knife. Make like a line so that when you're cutting, you're like, oh, it's up to the line, that's how far down you need to be. It's a really, it's a cosplayer's way to do things, but, it works. And you don't have to spend, an extra like $10, $15 for a more expensive knife. I mean, I recommend getting a better knife in a general sense if you're going to be doing more of it, just because those $10, $15 extra dollars that one time usually pays off in the end down the road. Yeah.
Usually they're just like the cheap plastic ones, like $1, maybe $2 at most, so they're actually cheaper.
The only thing I've found with a lot of those plastic ones, especially the ones that you'll find some utility knives that are like the break-off knives. I personally don't like those. I notice they get dull really, really, really quick. But that's just my personal opinion. You guys can do whatever you want. Obviously, it's your money, it's your projects. You can do whatever you want. I'm just saying, in the past, I've dealt with them. I just prefer the metal ones, or an X-Acto knife, because those blades are also really easy to, one, find and buy, and two, they're really easy to replace. And they don't go dull very quickly, because they're usually meant to be making multiple cuts with extreme precision for a long period of time. But that being said, your knives will go dull. It's inevitable, and just be prepared at any point in your project that you will have to replace your knife. For instance, if you're making an entire armor set all in one go, you'll probably have to replace your knife set 2, 3, if you're using an X-Acto knife, potentially even upwards of like 6 or 7 times. Especially when you're dealing with thicker foam, because you're having to cut more foam, so the more thickness that you add, the amount of foam that you have to like cut through, I think it cubes. It's either square or cubes, I can't remember. So you'll have to replace them that much more often. I think that pretty much covers everything. If you guys have any more specific questions, I can take them.
I have more, it's a comment actually. When you're actually designing it, and you drew that little template, instead of having to draw it out, you just ask an engineer, because like I have access to CAD programs, so I can just CAD out a design for you instead of having to draw it out. And then I can plot it. I can plot a big piece of paper with it on, up to 3 feet wide and like 20 feet long.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that, especially for complex projects. Because say for instance,
I will have to.
there is also the
deploy
point of, if it's a common enough project, you can go on the prop replica form, or depending on specific types, if you're doing like a Halo-based project, I think it's the 301st Infantry Division online is like the Halo replica form. They have Pepakura files, and almost all of them are free to download because most of the members realize that they're high use and everybody wants them, so they just give them out. Sometimes you'll have to pay for them, depending on especially if it's less known, the person that designed them, because they take hours and hours and hours and hours of 3D modeling just to get the models right, depending on how complex the piece is. And you just take them, you go to the Pepakura site, you upload the file, and it will give you back the 8x11 sheets that you print out the pieces on. And you can technically print them out on a normal sheet and then apply them directly to the foam. But if you're doing like a base resin casting build, you can print them on cardstock. And it's along the similar lines of that. But if you're going for something that is as simple as Jean's plate armor, which is literally just this shape, just here. Like I said, do whatever pattern making you want. Specifically, this is how I did it. You don't have to do it how I do it. I don't recommend that you do it how I do it. It was, one of those things where it's like, oh, I have a day to do this. Well, this is the only way I know how to do it really quickly, so I'm doing it. If you're really good at just visualizing, sometimes you can freehand it. I personally don't recommend that as just a person that, as somebody that's actually kind of decent at freehanding, it's hard to get complex shapes by freehanding, especially if you want symmetry. If you're really looking for symmetry and getting things exactly like specific to like the design, the 3D modeling option is your best bet because it will be exactly how you want it because it's modeled to be as such. But once again, it can also be more time consuming because they also have to model it, and it takes time to model things. Like a common like Halo helmet that's on the prop replica form, a lot of times the makers post the hours that they like took them to make the models, and they're usually like 40 hours of work, like straight hours of work. So you also have to realize that even for some, then that's just the modeling process. That's not even beginning the building process. So the people that model those, that's also why they pay, like they make you pay for their services, because you don't want to spend 40 hours of working on a modeling project only to just, give it away for free. I mean, some people are really nice, and a lot of people online are really nice because they're doing the models for doing it themselves. So they were going to make it anyway, and they're like, well, I have it, so I'm just going to give it out. But sometimes you're not going to get away that easy, and sometimes you're just not going to find what you need. You can also, like you said, you can find somebody to model it for you. A lot of times you'll obviously have to pay for it because it's a specific piece that they would normally be making. Especially the longer it takes, the more they're going to want. Or if it's something as simple as this, it's this on a 3D on a CAD program, I could probably print this off in like 30 minutes. Like it's not as difficult, but when you're making a full suit, you're going to spend more hours on it. And it all depends on your project. And it really sucks to have to say that in the sense of I can only give you guys tutorials on so much things because really every project is a case-by-case basis. I can tell you how to cut the foam, but it doesn't really help until you're actually cutting it for a specific purpose in a specific way. What one technique works for one armor piece doesn't work for the next. And it's really, once again, trial and error. So just experiment also works. But research also does. If you look up different techniques, you can find 5 different techniques on how to do one specific thing for a specific type of problem. Because there's 5 different people that have done it, and they all did it entirely differently. It all depends on what you want to do and what you physically can do. Obviously, somebody that has the capabilities of in-home studio workshop has more capabilities than a college student that's living in a dorm. So you have to look at what you have, you have to look at what the other people you're looking off of have, and you have to kind of judge what you can do physically compared to what they can do. So, yeah.
I have a question about cuts. If you want to cut something circular will you do it in the same way and with the same kind of blade as you would in a normal straight cut?
Personally, I make all of my cuts with just a single blade.
Mm-hmm.
There are better
Cutting tools?
cutting tools, like X-Acto tools for cutting specific shapes. I personally haven't used them. Just because I don't want to spend the extra, $20 to use something that I might not actually use or find as efficient as what I'm doing right now. At some point when I'm actually experimenting, I might do that, but there are things out there. Once again, research is your main bet here. You can look things up. You can look what other people have. You can also look up the cutting tools you're working with, because X-Acto has a website. They have, all of their products listed. I'm pretty sure they even have tutorials on how to use their products listed on their website. So just whatever you feel is efficient is what I would recommend to you, because it's similar in the sense of art. What one person says is how you draw something is not exactly the best thing that another person says is the best way to draw something. So it's all personal opinion and personal use. Any more? I think that's it.